We are back with Robert Higgs of the Independent Institute. Robert Higgs, for people just tuning in, or if they've been watching you for the last couple hours on In Depth, and they wanted to learn more about you or read one of your books, what would you recommend?
I would probably recommend the book called Against Leviathan. In a way, they would learn more about me because that book was aimed not so much at colleagues in the social sciences as is aimed at the general public. And so it's quite accessible, but it's also more free-swinging, and some of the essays in there are quite polemical. Others are more scholarly. But I think sometimes you learn more about a person from his polemics than you do from his scholarship.
What is the Federal Register, and do you read it?
Well, the Federal Register is the government's publication where they have to publish every new proposed regulation or change in regulation or final regulation, what have you. So it comes out all the time, and by the end of the year, it's an enormous thing just to list and describe all of these regulations.
Do you read it?
Oh, I have read it. Nobody reads it the way you'd read a novel. I've used it in my work to go back, particularly when I was working on FDA regulation. I read quite a lot of the Federal Register in those days.
You write, already profuse beyond comprehension, the labyrinth grows ever more extensive. In the U.S., at the federal level alone, the 4,000 to 5,000 new final rules put in place each year require some 20,000 pages of the Federal Register for their official promulgation.
I think ordinary people would be amazed and appalled if they were to open up the Federal Register and try to read it. First of all, they'd discover it's almost incomprehensible because many of these regulations are quite technical. For example, the ones relating to the Food and Drug Administration often involve mathematical formulas and descriptions of various chemicals and chemical reactions. And likewise, for other areas of regulation, you'd find all kinds of arcane information there, but you really wouldn't be able to understand quite what they were getting at because so much of it relates to revising Section 421-9 of the law of 1977 and so forth. Lawyers are the ones that have their eyes glued to the Federal Register and regulators because they're required by law to go through the motions of publicizing what they do.
Lee Dembart in L.A. emails, I'm surprised to see C. Wright Mills listed as one of your greatest influences. Mills was on the far left. What was his influence on you?
Mills actually had several kinds of influence on me. I was very fond of his writing when I was an undergraduate in college in the 1960s, and he died in the early 1960s. So this was at the time when many people who thought of themselves as new leftists were reading Mills' books, and I suppose to the extent that I had any political interests at that time that would lead me to categorize myself in some camp, I thought of myself as a kind of new leftist as an undergraduate, and so reading Mills was a very natural thing to do. But Mills was worth reading because Mills' books were packed with information, and one could learn a lot. Over the years, as my own education has continued, I've abandoned many of the views that I took from Mills, but I've never abandoned my respect for Mills as a scholar with integrity. One of the things that Mills wrote was a book called The Sociological Imagination. And this was a book which in many ways was a critique of how social studies and sociology in particular were being done. And Mills denounced many of the ways that social scientists were proceeding with their work because he thought it was a lot of obfuscation. And he thought it was tiptoeing around realities of power, particularly institutional power, and he believed these things were so important that they should be exposed and explained in plain language. And he wrote beautiful passages to mock the gobbledygook that sociologists use to write about their studies and their findings. And I've never quite got away from that lesson that Mills taught me, that plain writing is usually possible in economics and the other social sciences, that there's no reason to resort to obscurantism, whether it's mathematical formalism or any other form of priestly representation. These are things that close off economists and sociologists from their readers outside the monastery. And so I believe that Mills had good advice to give to young scholars. He had a lot of good advice, in fact, but basically it boiled down to be honest. That's a lesson we could all use, even social scientists.
Back to your calls for Robert Higgs, Claremont, California. Thank you for holding. You're on the air.
Mr. Higgs, I believe that both government and private statistics point to the fact that an ever-increasing percentage of the national wealth is flowing into the hands of fewer and fewer people, with the gulf between the haves and the have-nots continuing to widen. If you agree with these statistics, I have three questions for you. What do you think is the cause? If it continues, what will be the eventual consequences? And three, if you had the power to change it, would you, and how would you?
Okay, let me see if I can recall all the questions. Do I think this is a fact, that greater and greater proportion of the world's wealth is flowing into the hands of a small group of people? As I said earlier, it's hard to know. The data that are used to study this question are flawed in a variety of ways, and so there are serious questions about what the distribution of the world's income and wealth really is. It does appear from a variety of data that in the United States the distribution of income has become less equal in the past 20 or 25 years. Now, why has this happened? I think it has a whole variety of causes. The scholars who've studied the changing distribution of income point to changes in the payoff to higher education, for example, and to changes in the makeup of the labor force. In the 1960s and 70s, a great many women came into the paid labor force who had previously not worked there, and as a result they had less labor market experience, less training for specific jobs.